Hey guys, decided to get out of the office today. It's freaking cold here. We're in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and this is the Airborne and Special Operations Museum. I've been here before and I've done a little content, but we're going to walk around and just talk about some stuff in here. If you're driving from like New York to Florida or vice versa up and down the I-95, it's well worth a detour. It'll take you about an hour probably off the I-95 to get here, but it's well worth coming to see. It's actually a pretty cool museum. All right, let's go inside and see what they got. So military free fall, it seems really cool, but it's not skydiving. It's not, because you see these guys come in and land and do a stand-up landing, and I can do a stand-up landing too during the day, but at nighttime with a 100-pound rock and an O2 mask on me and night vision goggles, you end up looking at something like this. And if you look, the M4, the carbine is cross-mounted across his front. Now, if you're carrying a sniper rifle, it gets put there, and the carbine gets strapped on the right side along your pack and webbed into your harness, because you have to hit the ground running. That cross mount is kind of a newer thing. When I went to jump master school, that's what we used, and it can come off really, really quickly if you need to put the weapon into operation on the ground. Steering, like if you're gonna jump and land at nighttime with a lot of kit, you're not trying to flare and do a stand-up landing. You're just you go half brakes and do a parachute landing fall and tuck and roll. If you look on his right arm, he has the ripcord looped in on his wrist. So when you pull the ripcord and it deploys the chute, they hate it when you lose the ripcord. I would like to say I've never lost a ripcord, but that would not be accurate. OSS. Parachute, camouflage, jumpsuit. I love museums, man, and this is a really cool one. But if you look here, World War II stuff, we bounce around kind of thing. Fallschirmjäger helmet, the German Airborne helmet, the MP40 submachine gun, 9x19 parabellum round, German airborne uniforms. But if you look at the badge, it's a really cool badge. It's a Fallschirmjäger badge. There was massive problems in Europe in the 80s and 90s, and probably is to this day. They were digging up graves of soldiers, and not just Nazis, but also they were stealing these badges, because guys were getting buried with their badges, and those badges were worth a lot of money. So people were digging up these graves from World War II and stealing the badges and stealing all the bling. Kind of crazy. I did a podcast with Sean Kirkwood the other day, and we talked about the evolution of military equipment, and he came in '87, I think, and he was saying that they still had these old Jeeps. They were getting rid of them, they were getting the Humvees, but what a workhorse, man. For years and years and years, I would love to have one just to have it. What an iconic piece of military memorabilia. I remember hearing years ago that Jeep stood for just enough essential parts, which would make sense, but I don't think that's really accurate. But what a cool little vehicle. Yeah. I've been to this museum before, but I hadn't seen this one. This is, you can see the picture here, Italian airborne motorcycle, and it would take a man who's firm in his manhood to ride on that thing. Imagine the laughter as you drove through on that. Maybe it's better than walking, I don't know. The parachute, the static line parachute has not changed that much. I would like to think it's better, but this is your reserve parachute here. So unlike freefall, in freefall the reserve sits underneath the main on your back. In static line, the main chute sits on the back. This is your static line that hooks up. It automatically deploys, and if it doesn't deploy, then you pull this and release the reserve, which is on your front, which thank goodness I've never had to do. But yeah. They used to say in airborne school, all your jumps are night jumps because you have your eyes closed. When I jumped in airborne school, you do 5 jumps, and the last one's a mass jump where you're jumping out both doors. And they put one out the left, one out the right, one out the left. When I came out, the guy on the left hesitated, and there's 2 jump masters putting them out, right? So when I came out, I went underneath the bird, and this guy came out at the same time, and when my chute opened, I saw a parachute right in front of me. And they teach you to spread eagle, and I went into his lines because he had the parachute and then his lines and the chute over his head and the body, and I went right into his lines and I spread eagle, and I pushed right in, so he was underneath me, and it pushed me back out, and I pulled the riser and turned away, and luckily I didn't get entangled with him on with the 2 parachutes tangled together, and that would have been pretty bad. But it scared the bejesus out of me, but I lived. This is where the weapon was deployed. It's kind of a weird thing. We stick it in the side now for free fall, and it goes in a bag like this for static line, but it's in a different position. All right. North Africa. Desert warfare, which I've done, is a whole different ball game. If you ever look at the North African campaign, the Germans under Rommel and the British and the Americans they went back and forth across North Africa a bunch of times. Some of the cities there have fell from one to the other a bunch of times. And Libya there was a lot of fighting in Libya back then. I had an uncle who went into the British Army in 1946, so he missed the war, and he went to North Africa. And he said they drove on these trails through the desert that were very, very distinctly marked, and they couldn't move left or right because there was mines everywhere. And he said as you drove, there was crashed airplanes and burnt out tanks on both sides of the road because the battle went across back and forth a lot in North Africa. The old bazooka, anti-tank weapon. Pretty much have to hit it very close and in the ass. And then the MG34 was a precursor for the MG42, belt-fed machine gun, very rapid firing, and there are versions of this still being used today. The old 1911. I think if I had a fight in World War II and I had to pick a rifle on the American side, that's what I would pick. The M1 carbine, folding stock, not a big bullet, but kind of light, maneuverable, kind of a cool rifle. I remember watching a documentary about Special Forces in Vietnam, and the guy was saying they give these Vietnamese M1 carbine or M1 Garands, big, that one right there you can spin around, big heavy rifle, and it was bigger than the small little Vietnamese soldiers and Montagnard soldiers, so they end up getting rid of them and giving them these M1 carbines, which is much more suited to smaller troops like that. When World War II kicked off, the American military and the British had no airborne troops. It was very much pioneered by the Germans and Fallschirmjäger, and they had to rapidly build these airborne troops because it was a huge capability gap in the military. The Crete was taken by the Germans with Fallschirmjäger airborne troops because it was completely surrounded by the Royal Navy. But the Germans lost so many troops there that they never again launched an airborne operation. It was devastating to that force. You think the French resistance really looked like that? Like the only thing missing is onions hanging around his neck. He looks like so French. There you go, right? There's a couple of iconic weapons in World War II, a lot of iconic, but this is a really cool one right here. The Sten gun with a suppressor on it. The old Furbaum Sykes combat fighting knife. That thing is, it's not a survival knife, it's not for cutting stuff, it's purely for killing people, that's all it's for. All right. Hear the gunfighting? You can see up there, I mean, I don't know if you've seen that. The Luger pistol, classic. And then the MG42, there's still versions of this. I put a video on my YouTube of me shooting this. When I was training the Iraqi army, they had these, they're made in Pakistan, and they call them MG3s, and they were 7.62 by 51 NATO rounds. So a modern NATO round. This thing fires like 1,200 rounds a minute. It's very rapid firing. This thing is like a brutal thing to fire. It's a heavy, heavy gun. And then that rifle is the Mosin again. I have a version of that hanging up in our podcast room that I got in Afghanistan. The old 30 caliber machine gun. The Pacific battlefield was kind of under-resourced and neglected for a very long time. Most of the focus was in Europe. It's funny, when me and Sean were doing that podcast too, we were talking about that. That's the grease gun we were talking about. That was still in service up until the 90s. In the tankers and mechanics were using them. There's no safety on that thing. You just flip that little latch open and that's your safety. It won't cock without it. This is a cool exhibit right here. It speaks for itself.
I didn't want to withdraw.
Look down on the ground.
Fire, no more.